I would say that I would deepen my focus and understanding, meaning skill set around the financial analysis administration of the agency with a higher focus on profit as opposed to revenue.
Hmm.
I have always, there's a salesman's, kind of dimension to me, and I'm very much driven by, bringing in the bacon, cash flow, all of those things, which are incredibly important. But I would say I wish I had spent more time on once it comes in the door and the process and the financial analytics to arrive at profit. I wish I had a deeper focus on that because that's ultimately what this is about. Look, we've been profitable, but I wish I had spent more time on that as opposed to selling and just what's in the bank and are we covered, over the next 6 weeks, that kind of thing.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Founder. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Scott Markman. And Scott grew up in an entrepreneurial family, knew he always wanted to do his own business someday. So after he moved to Chicago in '88 and worked for an agency for a period of time and ended up getting fired from the only job he ever got fired from, and took a few months off, decided what he's going to do. Got a personal loan from his parents in his 30s, started his own agency, has been growing it ever since. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Scott.
Thank you, sir. Great to be back and continue our conversation.
Absolutely. And just as a quick reminder to the audience, Scott's been on a couple of our sister podcasts, including the Inventive Journey, as well as the Inventive Expert. So if you want to catch a bit more of Scott's expertise or hear his full journey, definitely make sure to go check out those episodes. But just for those audience members that haven't had a chance to catch either of those episodes, just give us a 1 or 2 minute introduction before we dive into the founding journey.
Sure. So, as Devin mentioned, I grew up in a family where my parents started a small business the year I was born, 8 months before I was born. And so that's all I ever knew growing up. And I worked in the business as a kid and summers and whatnot. And so I a little bit learned the basics of small business from my parents' feet. And it was something we talked about at the dinner table all the time. And so I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed sort of the running around show and dealing with customers and producing a quality product and maybe some aspects of managing employees. And so the fundamentals were just something I knew was comfortable with. And so I always figured it would be a part of my life. But the where, when, and how, I didn't really know. And so as Devin mentioned, I'm a graphic designer by education, went to Washington and St. Louis and got my design degree, and was somebody else's designer for a number of years, worked at some great firms in St. Louis and Baltimore, and then here in Chicago. Moved here for a job. But as Devin mentioned, it wasn't a great fit with the owner of that firm and myself. And about a year into it, I was shown the door, and I was actually just turned 30, crossroads of life. What do I do? Do I get another design job in Chicago? Do I move back to Baltimore? Do I buy my parents' business because they're getting ready to sell? And kind of said, look, one last try. If you want to do this, now's the time. And the last option was to consider hanging my shingle. And so I thought about it for about 3 weeks and decided to go with option 4. And some personal reasons, some professional reasons. And my parents said, look, we'll loan you, some money to give it a go. And if, candidly, if you blow the money, you blow the money. It was a great gift in terms of psychological and emotional freedom, the freedom to fail. And so I had about 90 days to make it. And it was January the 1st, 1990, ready, set, go. And here I am 34 and a half years later.
No, that's awesome. So let's dive into some of that just a bit more. So, so you're coming off of, you as or in your own words, or when we talked a little bit before, only job you ever got fired from. And so, but that still always is an ouch, or it's a little bit of a hit to at least for most people, maybe not all, but a hit to the self-esteem. But also gives you a chance to reset and say, okay, now I'm at a bit of a crossroads. I'm forced to do something different, and I can either go and find another job and just kind of go down the same route and find it somewhere else, or I can go my own way where I've always wanted to go. But how did you kind of weigh that or make that balance? And then how did you figure out what you were going to do if you did go your own way?
So the biggest driver, it's a great question, by the way, and the biggest driver of deciding ultimately what I wanted to do was really simple, and it was emotional. I could not work for anybody else at that point in my life. I had been sort of a little bit, scarred, and I just sort of said, I would rather fail on my own than have to answer to somebody else. And there was no logic to it. It was just what I needed at that time. And so that was the deciding factor. The second factor was, candidly, again, I thought long and hard about buying my parents' business, their life savings, and all of that stuff. They were not going to give it to me. I had to buy it. And what I kind of figured out was my parents loved their business and I didn't. I liked it. I didn't love it. And to make that my life's work, I just thought I'd rather do what I love to do and make my own way in Chicago. And I only lived here for a year, so I didn't have a network and all that stuff. I had to kind of build that over a number of years. But I just emotionally felt like that would be more gratifying and rewarding to me, not only at that moment, but kind of into the indefinite future. So those are the two major drivers. It wasn't about economic opportunity or which set of challenges would be less challenging. I didn't know. I just sort of said, this is what I need at the time. And again, I took about several weeks to think about it. So it wasn't some snap decision. And look, it's been an up and down journey, a lot more up than down, but you run a business, there are lots of fits and starts and whatever. And I think when I look back 34.5 years later, it was the right choice.
No, that's awesome. So, and sounds so you say, okay, I don't love what I'm doing now, and I see other people that do love what they're doing. And I will disclaim. I think even if you love what you're doing, there's still hard days. There's still days that you don't enjoy the business. It's not like every day is wonderful and every day is perfect. But at least the vast majority of the time you enjoy what you're doing and you get and do what you love. So now you decide, okay, kind of have that background going, with some of the design and some of that experience. Decide you're going to go out on your own. So did you go to your parents and kind of pitch the idea, hey, do you want to invest in my business? And was it a loan or a gift, or did they say, hey, we want to help you out, or we want to give you, because it's very nice of your parents, and that's a very helpful to kick things off. But kind of how did that go?
Yeah, so we agreed to structure it as a loan, and I paid them a certain fixed amount over, I'd say, about 4 years. And candidly, at that point, this was their doing, not mine. I might have paid off 2/3 of the loan or something at that point. And at that point, they were so thrilled and proud of what I was doing and proud of me, candidly, that was their words, that they just forgave the rest of the loan.
Wow.
And again, it's nominal money. It was under $10,000. But symbolically, it was, look, they always had my back, and we talked about business a lot, all the time on the phone when we were together, after I got married and had children. And it was kind of a common ground for us. And but it was safe space for me that I had my business and I sought their counsel, but at the end of the day, it was my call. But I think it was a healthy thing for me to structure it as a loan and to have a sense of obligation to pay them back and to return the commitment. And it wasn't just, here's a gift, thank you very much. I mean, again, the pressure internally to get to a certain degree of traction, but also to pay them back was, I think, important for me at that stage of my life in terms of responsibility and things like that.
No, I definitely agree with you. And I think that having that sense of responsibility, it creates a bit more of an urgency. In other words, if it's just, kind of free money, well, I'll go out and try it. And if not, I'll just go back to what I was doing. But I think when you say, no, I owe someone this, and, feel like I'm obligated in a good way to repay it, then it kind of gives you that urgency. Now I've got to make this work, and I want to take advantage of the opportunity.
Devin, I want to tie something back, and it just popped in my head. when I was in eighth grade, my parents said, you're going to college and you're going to help pay for it. They did fine, but I mean, everybody had to chip in. I got a full ride to WashU. Um, and even with that, what my parents contributed and what I contributed, that's how I was blessed to walk out of college with no debt. But I started working for it in eighth grade. And so there's a little bit of a grinder mentality that I have, and I've had since I was, 13 or 14. And it never goes away. And that imprint on me also when I, started this business, which is, 17 years later or whatever, I had that same grinder mentality, and I still have it today. We've had our share of success and, built the agency to a national player, all of these things, and have done some wonderful things in collaboration with my team here, but I still have that grinder mentality. And it probably started when I was 14.
Hmm. No, I think that, so it's interesting. Sometimes I think people very early on have that mentality, and other times it kind of comes naturally as you find your way and figure things out. But it's always interesting to kind of see how that comes about. So now you have got or fired from the other job, have the opportunity, got the loan from your parents, or kind of figure out what you're going to do. Now walk us through, how did you get the business set up, and how did it go, and how did you get it founded, and kind of how did you get it started?
So the first thing I needed to do was to name this thing. And again, this is what I do for a living. And it took a while, and I had a bunch of names and what I wanted it to represent and feel like and all this good stuff. And I had 30 days to pick a name and develop a trademark, a logo. That's what I do. And it's the old cobbler's children, parable. And it was challenging. And I had a lawyer who was going to file the papers, incorporation, and he's like, okay, I need something. And on that morning, I picked the name Monogram, that is now Monogram Group, that we've had all these years. But that time pressure was so critical, and I had developed a logo to kind of go with it. So that morning, I gave him what he needed to go, make me official with the state of Illinois. The second thing I had to do was to, have an office. I thought long and hard about sort of working, from my kitchen table, and I decided, again, for me, that wasn't going to work. This is, again, decades before COVID and, working from home and all the things that we just take for granted today. But in 1990, that would have been a lifestyle, and you choose into it or you don't. And for me, that was not going to work. I needed to leave my apartment and take the train and go to work. And so I had worked in downtown Chicago, and I knew at the time, and even to some degree today, that something called the, Michigan Avenue agency, like Madison Avenue in New York. Well, here was Michigan Avenue. And so I was very lucky to find a shared office space with a bunch of creatives on Michigan Avenue. And so my first business card was 320 North Michigan Avenue. And I designed a business card and, stationery and all that was very established and sort of, felt like giving it around for 20 years. And so between that address and the look of my stuff, I just felt like I could overcome the fact that I was this young kid who'd only been in Chicago for a year and really didn't really know anybody, and was showing up in front door of people and saying, give me a project. So that Michigan Avenue address was critical for me. The third thing I did was I took out of that 20 grand, I spent $5,000 on one thing, a Mac. And again, you may laugh at that, but this was, a 40 megabyte hard drive, a screen about, that big. And it was like a block, and it was on my desk. And I spent a quarter of the money my parents gave me just on that computer, because the firm I moved to Chicago to work for was among the first to adapt computers and, what had been in hand, crafted process. And so I knew how to do that. And I thought it would overcome to some degree not having clients and having a network, because I could say, hey, I'm on the vanguard of how things are being done. And that was true. And it worked. So I had a 10 by 12 office. I had a Mac. I had an address, I had a business card, and I had any contacts I could get. And I just picked up the phone and started calling people. Again, email didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. This was phone calls and showing up at people's front door and hawking your wares. And it took about 6 weeks, and I got my first big project. Got a couple of small ones, but the first big project, and boy, did it save the day.
No, that's awesome. So now you kind of, and just kind of picking up with that. So you kind of, go or get the feeling that the business has been around forever, established, get the branding in place, get the name in place, get all kind of get the computer and all the formalities. Now, as you're going and knocking doors and starting to get clients, was it as easy as you thought? Was it much harder than you thought? Did it take a while? Was it pretty quick? Kind of walk us through kind of building out that clientele or kind of building the business in the early days.
So the first thing I did was I contacted anybody I knew, everybody I knew in Chicago and in Baltimore, or my college friends, to pick the brains of who they could make introductions or refer me into suggestions. So I tapped my network. It was as elemental and down and dirty as it could be, because again, I didn't even have vendors here. I had to find printers and photographers and all that stuff. And so I got some leads, and I started knocking on doors. I think I did 40 presentations in 6 weeks. And it's a little bit like foraging in the forest. And if you find nuts and berries, you eat, and if you don't, you don't. And so out of those 40 first meetings in 6 weeks, I got one project for about $12,000. It was candidly a corporate brochure. And I got some small projects, a newsletter here and there from some not-for-profits that, again, people introduced me to, a couple grand here and there, but it was kind of enough to pay the rent and the phone bill and to pay myself a little bit of something. And, again, I would have said I had 15,000 left between my personal expenses and business expenses. I figured I had 90 days. Now, was that literally true? I'm not sure, but it was a great, ready to go kind of self-imposed pressure. And so in that, about half of that time, I got, some projects, but the one thing for about 12 grand. And that lasted me for a while. I think that first year, my all-in revenue was $60,000.
No, that's awesome. It sounds like took a little bit of time to figure it out, but you had that urgency, and then you also were able to go and pitch people and bring some or people on. So now you say, okay, starting to get a bit of traction, have a bit more runway, starting to bring people on, and still early on. Now kind of walk us through, that first year or two, because I think you guys have been in business now 20, 30 years. Is that right?
This is our 34th year.
34th year. So now, and it's always easy when you get far enough into your business, you get established, you have the clientele, you kind of have things figured out. Then it, to a degree, not that it is ever easy, but it feels a bit easier, at least a bit more comfortable. And yet early on, sometimes you still have that, hey, we have to pivot, we have to adjust, we have to readjust pricing or hiring or expansion or shrinking or moving. So kind of walk us through kind of how did that now, or kind of expanding out that first year or two go as you're now bringing on, getting a bit more runway and growing the business.
So at the end of the first year, where I'm in the shared office on Michigan Avenue with 5 or 6 other folks, and really love that, the convenience, the address, the people I was hanging out with were great. But towards the end of that first year, a college friend started an agency and had a bigger space about, I don't know, 8 blocks away. And we're looking for a subletter, just the space they got. And it allowed me to have sort of my own space, but, 3 times the size. And for, a tiny bit more money. And so I was, I had a 1-year lease in the first place. And so I just moved to a second place. And if I wanted to take on some employees, 1 or 2, I had the space to do it. So, and there was a nice conference room and, all that good stuff. And it was 3 blocks from where my apartment was. So that was the second big move. And then I hired my first employee kind of maybe towards the middle of my 3rd year. So I just, in effect, was a freelancer for about 2.5 years, and then hired my first employee at about that 2.5 year point. So in our 4th year, we got our first individual, our office, first time, again, about 4 blocks away. And I had 2 employees at that point. So there were 3 of us that moved into that office in the 4th year.
Well, that's awesome. Sounds like it was, and so now you're bringing people on. How did that, was that, just kind of to dive into that, was it one where, because you can have an excitement and saying, hey, we're expanding, we're growing, we're needing to bring on additional team members. By the same token, you can say, now it's not just me. I have responsibility for other people, and I have to write out the checks to them as well. And, they're kind of relying on me to make the business a go. So how did that, how did that adjust or that feel, or was it pretty seamless or kind of stressful, or give us a bit of insight there?
So look, across anybody's career, as you advance, you start to, get on more responsibility. And one of those things is managing people, recruiting them, hiring them, managing them, and at times letting them go. And your managerial style is a function of who you are, but also who influenced you, who are your mentors, and what do you value, and how do you want to conduct yourself. And there's really no preparation for it. You just have to, again, take the models, the lessons you've learned up until that point, and then model your behavior accordingly. Now, I had worked for some folks who I admired greatly, and even today are kind of acting a mentorship role for me, even at almost age 64. That's the truth. I've got two guys that are in their 70s I've known for decades that are kind of even today my mentors. But I also worked for some folks that I didn't really care for working for them. And I learned a little bit what I didn't want to do or how I didn't want to conduct myself. And a lot of that is human relations and, kind of what you believe and how you're wired and all in what you're driven towards. And that's incredibly important. Managerial skill is incredibly important, whether you manage one person or 100. So that was added to my plate, as I took on employees. But also it got down to a financial side. Okay, I'm investing X amount of money in their salary and their benefits. And how can I extract the most value? And that got into who am I hiring? What am I asking him to do? Because my third employee kind of could do some design production work, but also help me run the company and was working on his MBA. So I got a bit of a twofer with this fellow. And then the first employee I hired was a full-time designer. So I had myself as a creative and also salesman and paying the bills and all that, one full-time creative and then one part-time creative, and then somebody to help me with the administrative financial side of the business.
Wow, that's awesome. No, sounds like a good growth path, and worked out well, and was a good opportunity. So now, or we won't catch up to exactly where you're at today, but walk us through, because 34 years has been a while. Or how have things evolved? How has it grown? How has it changed? Or has it really just stayed the same, and and figured out what worked and continued forward? Or kind of walk us through now, what has that iteration been?
So over time, we steadily grew. We had a growth spike from 1998 until 2001. Our revenues increased substantially. By that time, we were a staff of about 7. I eventually took on 2 minority partners who were dear college friends, who brought different experiences and skills to the table, and they had moonlit for me on a freelance basis, both for about 10 years. So we had a business history as well. So I took on one partner in 2002 and one in 2006. The first partner left in 2015, and the second partner kind of left about 4 years ago. A longtime employee, I sort of made a partner. We've worked together for about, 25 years now. And so he's now a minority partner, very active in the business. And we evolved as opportunities came up and skill sets were added. We evolved from being a design firm to an advertising agency to a branding agency, which is sort of what we've been for about the last 18 years. And so what are we selling? The expertise, the people in the agency, who are our clients? What are they coming to us for to solve and to deliver has evolved over time. We still bang out lots of design work, but it's in the context of brand. And, it's a piece of a much bigger whole. So look, I still get to scratch my design itch. I'm a designer by passion and education, but I have not designed anything in, 27 or 8 years. My role is, evolved wildly over time, and yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, it sounds like it's been a great journey and a great path, and definitely appreciate you sharing that founding journey. It's always kind of fun to see how, you know, a business that's been around for quite a while has been or was originally started and conceived, so to speak. So that's awesome. So
Here's what I would sort of share with your listeners, Devin. And you know this. I mean, you're either cut out for being an entrepreneur or you aren't. You either have the fire in your belly or you don't. Nobody can drive you harder than you drive yourself. And you either are, pursuing the brass ring or you're not, and you're willing to withstand pressures and responsibilities that you put on yourself. And I just found that I love that through the ups and downs and whatnot. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And as a person in their early to mid 60s now, I look back on the career and look, would I have changed some things? Sure, I wouldn't trade it for anything to anybody. And I've got a lot of runway left. I've got about 4 or 5 years left. I love what I do. I love who I do it with and who I do it for. And there aren't a lot of people that can say that. And if that's its own reward, then yes, I have that reward.
no, that's awesome. So, and I'm right there with you. And I think, it's interesting. My wife is not an entrepreneur at heart at all. She knows it and I know it. She always is very supportive of me. And on the other hand, that I could never do it. And yet I'm just the opposite of going and working for someone else. I found out that, being an entrepreneur is what I love and am passionate about. So I definitely agree with that sentiment. So, well, now as we are wrapping up the episode, I always like to wrap up with one question. So we're going to jump to that now, which would be, so if you could go back to the early days of the business, what would be the one decision you'd make differently?
I would say that I would deepen my focus and understanding, meaning skill set, around the financial analysis administration of the agency with a higher focus on profit as opposed to revenue. I have always, there's a salesman's, kind of dimension to me. And I'm very much driven by, bringing in the bacon, cash flow, all of those things, which are incredibly important. But I would say I wish I had spent more time on once it comes in the door and the process and the financial analytics to arrive at profit. I wish I had a deeper focus on that, because that's ultimately what this is about. Look, we've been profitable, but I wish I had spent more time on that as opposed to selling and just what's in the bank and are we covered, over the next 6 weeks, that kind of thing.
No, and it is interesting because I'm a lover. I like to watch Shark Tank. I watch The Profit. I love to watch a whole bunch of different type of business shows, and you'll hear these great numbers. We have all this revenue and we have all this money coming in, and they say, "And what's your profitability?" "Oh, we're not profitable yet." And it's just interesting, the difference between, I think that, you hear these big numbers and they're making all this money and think, oh, they've just got to be rolling in it. And yet they're still not profitable. And so I think that that's one thing that a lot of times you have to learn is the amount of money you're bringing in versus the profit you're making doesn't always correspond. And you have to focus on the right things to make the business profitable, not just having a lot of money come in.
One last thing before we wrap up. I have been fortunate to have to the private equity sector for 27 years. It's the one sector we've had more clients than any other, and more clients than any other agency in America. It's almost 85. And so I know the business of private equity, and businesses are bought and sold based on multiples of EBITDA, meaning profit.
Sure.
That's the top line has nothing to do with it. It's profit, and it's the benchmark where our businesses are valued and bought and sold. And so, now I spend a lot of time on profit, because ultimately at some point I want to sell this agency, let's say in 5 years. And I just know that's going to be the size of the check. It starts with your EBITDA and multiple EBITDA.
Absolutely. I think it's a great piece of advice, great takeaway. So, well, now as we do wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. So visit our website, monogramgroup.com, or my email, smarkman, SMARKMAN @monogramgroup.com. Those are the two easy ways to connect. And also the way, I'm not even sure you know this, but we have actually started our own podcast, and it's private equity focused, and we're trying to expand our presence there. And so we just actually dropped our second episode today. So, first of all, I want to say thanks to you because being a guest now on a few times have helped me understand kind of what this is all about. So it's that's now a piece of the puzzle.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on the launch of the podcast. It's always a labor of love, and hopefully a fun endeavor for you. So there's certainly good luck with that, and loved having you on. So with that, thank you again for coming on. Now, for all of you that are listeners, to help us to share these journeys and this expertise with even more startups and small businesses, make sure to click share, subscribe, and like the podcast. And with that, if along your journey you ever need help with startup or with your startup, your small business with patents or trademarks, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Scott, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you so much, Evan, for having me on again.